your location, if you can, that'd be brilliant. So first of all, we'll start off with a short video. It's about 7.5 minutes long, and it's a tour of the building with a bit of commentary, and it was recorded last week, so it's pretty up to date.
Oh, hello. Welcome to the Arlington Bass Club, the oldest club of its kind in Europe. My name's Colin, and I will be showing you around.
And I'm Lucy. I'll be filling in a bit of the historical detail for you.
Why don't you come on in?
The building, as we see it today, was built in 4 phases over 32 years, from 1871 to 1902. The original building was designed by John Burnett Sr. and housed the swimming pond, the changing rooms, and baths. In 1875, a Turkish bath was added, along with a lounge for the members. Membership had levelled out by 1893, and it was decided to add rooms for billiards and cards. And finally, in 1902, a gymnasium was added on the first floor. It was Grade B listed in 1986 and achieved Grade A listing in 2014. Historic Environment Scotland described it as an outstanding and early example of an early private members' swimming baths, with Turkish baths and other facilities, for it survives largely as it was built in the late 19th and early 20th century. It has a good interior and was designed by one of the leading architects of the period. While in 2014, Historic Scotland called it outstanding examples of 19th century swimming pool architecture, and they have retained their special character while continuing to delight their members today.
This is our swimming pool, or as they were known in Victorian times, swimming ponds. The pool is 70 feet long and 35 feet wide, built before the 25-metre became the standard. Water from Loch Katrine is recirculated and cleaned by sand filtration and then heated to 28 degrees centigrade. Trapeze and travelling rings were common in Victorian pools. The terrazzo flooring was laid in 1920. This is the reading room, which also houses the war memorial to the members who fell in the First and Second World War. Of course, they're all heroes, and they are remembered fondly.
Andrew Miles, the architect, was a member of the Arlington. He designed many industrial buildings around the city of Glasgow. The skylights mean the room is flooded with natural light. Here we are above the main door in the recently refurbished upstairs spa. It originally had a very different use. It was the senior billiard room.
The gymnasium was designed in 1902 by Benjamin Connor, who was also a member of the club. Money was raised to build a gym, but the management committee installed billiard tables in 1902 because they were more profitable. It finally became a gym in the 1980s. The free weights room was part of the 1902 extension and was originally built as a ladies' sitting room.
These doors on the walls you may have seen dotted around the building. were part of the Plenum heating system and bring warm air from the boilers in the basement.
Now for something really special. We can't normally go into here, the basement, but today's a special occasion, so follow me. The sand filter has been cleaning the pool since the 1930s. Our gas-fired boilers heat the building and pond water.
We're now beneath the Turkish Room, where the walls are made of no-fines concrete, meaning little or no fine aggregates are used. Less cement is employed in the mix, making it cost-efficient.
This is where the members come to relax. This is the Turkish suite. The process of a Turkish bath is to undress, wash, raise the body temperature till perspiring, then wash or be scrubbed down and return to a warm room to relax.
Club rules make this a quiet space for relaxation. It was constructed in 1875 by Charles Drake, a Victorian pioneer of poured concrete. Charles Drake wrote, "No example that I am aware of exists in Scotland of the best form of concrete roof. The domed concrete roof of the Arlington Street swimming baths, Glasgow, being the best of the concrete roofs I have executed in Scotland." The floor is original Minton, Hollins and Co tiles.
The bench where the world's greatest dancer, Rudolf Nureyev, received a massage. Well, that's the end of the tour today. I hope you enjoyed seeing around.
Be sure and come back for a proper tour when we can meet up again. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed that brief glimpse inside the Arlington Baths. As I say, normally at this time of year, we do welcome hundreds of people through the door. We'd have a very busy couple of days showing people around or answering all their questions. And unfortunately, we can't do that this year. But we'll try and answer any questions that you have and also fill in some of the extra details that we didn't manage to squeeze into the brief film. So first of all, you'll have seen inside the building. It was actually constructed in several different parts over several years. And I think I'll ask Will if he can tell us a little bit more about sort of how the building was first constructed and then how it developed over the next few years.
Okay, well, the construction began in 1870 with the original building opening on August 1st, 1871. The facade was just a single story, designed by the architect John Burnett, who was one of Glasgow's leading architects at the time, and whose son would become even more famous in becoming Sir John James Burnett. Can we see the facade, John? So So in 1871, it was built as the single-story building. They talk about the building being made up of two wings to the left and right of the central front door. And it's meant to resemble a Roman stables. If you imagine Woodlands at the time was still quite undeveloped land, so it would have sat by itself. Then inside the building itself at the time was the pond, some changing facilities, and some baths for the senior members, because we know that even the houses of Park Circus, for instance, might not have had interior sanitation at that time, which is a bit impressive. If we move on to 1875, the pool decides to get very hip and build a Turkish bath, which had become the latest Victorian fashion, and it builds on to the south of the building and gives us our new front door, the Turkish bath behind, and a members' lounge. So it kind of continues that feeling of the building being split in two. So instead of it being split in two in the original building by the main front door moves to the middle of the new building, and it's actually split in two by function in terms of relaxation on the left and swimming and exercise on the right. We don't know who the architect of the facade of this was. There's some evidence it might have been Burnet again, because he was constructing the church up at the top of Arlington Street and Woodlands Road at the same time, and that would have been handy. And he also continued the decoration of the Burnet facade anyway. The Turkish suite behind, as we heard in the video, was this innovative use of Victorian concrete by Charles Drake, which was something that we found out through research of the history group. Then things kind of settled down for a few years, but in 1888 they decide that the membership is falling because we don't have any billiard rooms. And other clubs in the West End had opened at this point and had a billiard room. So to kind of stem the flow of members, they decided they would construct a new billiard room. As the video said, it was Andrew Miles, and he adds the first part of the upper story. The room we're sitting in just now, which was originally a billiard room with 2 billiard tables, and the room next door where the spa is just now, which was the senior billiard room, with a grand staircase from the new kind of foyer entrance area. Then in 1902, the building at this point is looking a bit lopsided. In 1902, they come back and they build the gym, and that was another member, Benjamin Connor. And as we saw, they kind of continued this idea of skylighting around the pool. Both of these, the Miles and the Connor extensions, the Connor extension was built by things like a fete, wasn't it, Lucy? There was a fete they had in Glennon halls, and this room itself was built by a debenture scheme. So they were quite creative in the way they funded the building through the ages. Then if we go to the pool itself, part of the sort of stuff we found out by the history group was there had been rumours about a swim through between the pool and the Turkish area, which had been put in at the construction of the Turkish suite in 1875, and nobody quite believed it. It seemed quite an unusual idea. So here's the pool as it was actually in 1915, and what that shows is actually a lot of plants hanging from the ceiling of the rafters, and the Arlington Baths was described as being verdant in 1915, and quite a lot of pools of a similar age had exotic plants inside, because obviously we're quite warm, and also they were maybe coloured in colours that resembled nature. So there's a good chance actually the walls of our pool were green rather than blue to begin with. If we can see the floor plan, John. So this is a floor plan from 1893. And as we can see kind of on the top right of it, there's a sort of canal that comes through the top of the pool and enters the bottom of the Turkish suite. And we think it was possible that you could swim from the pool into the Turkish suite. It would take you into the shampooing room. So you come from the pool, shampoo down, go and get in the hot room and get sweaty, into the massage room and get scrubbed down. If we move on to the wall, John, so this shows us in profile the south wall of the pool, and it had these 3 ornamental arches that linked the Turkish extension and the original building at the time. And we can see the rightmost arch there has got this swim through canal, if you like. If you're ever at in Edinburgh, go to Portobello Pool, they have a very, very tiny version of this where they swim between their changing room and their hot room in very cold water. Okay, we don't. So we moved on. This then is our Turkish suite, probably the star of the Arlington. It kind of gets described as Glasgow's homage to the Alhambra in Granada, basically because it follows several rules about hammam architecture and Islamic architecture. On the ceiling, we see there's those sets of stars that come down the ceiling in increasing complexity as they come down. And that, if you're ever on any of the tours in Andalusia, you'll see most of the hammams follow that kind of pattern. They have increasing complex windows in their ceilings. The floor itself, then, as we heard, was Minton tiles. And we found out for a fact it was Minton and Hollands when we had some restoration done last year. And Andrew from Ware, who does a great job at repairing ceramics in the city, he was replacing this top corner of our floor, which was the most heavily trafficked area, which had been untouched for 150 years, as far as we know. So he dug up these tiles, and the next slide shows the subfloor, which is part of the Charles Drake concrete. So we've got some of the Charles Drake concrete flooring there, and the light coming in from the Turkish stars above. And then the final slide of here we've got the restoration as it was done. So it's almost like brand new looking when it finally occurred. Also, when we were digging them up, Andrew got quite excited about the interior fountain of the Arlington. These little green tiles are a vitreous mosaic tile, which apparently now are very expensive. And if we have to replace them, we have to go to Venice to get them. They were constructed in London, made in London by a tiler called Jesse Rust. And these little green mosaic tiles then were very common at the time, and they're extremely decorative when they've kind of water on them, as they would have had from splashes in the fountain. And they're found, weirdly, in a public toilet in Aberystwyth. We can kind of go onto that. This is from the internet, not from my knowledge. But, so this is an internet picture which shows exactly the same tile. And Andrew at Ware's absolutely certain that it is Jesse Rust tiles. I know we're probably one of the few places in Scotland with them. So that's basically our kind of quick tour of the decoration of the interior of the building. Thanks
so much, Will. So yes, obviously we have like our building is very special. It's unique, and it's really important to us. Will mentioned that the history group at the Arlington Baths has been doing research into the background of the building, and we've made like new discoveries, like those things about the tiles from doing that kind of research. Obviously, the history group, it's members from the club who are interested in the history of the club. And one of the things, as well as the building itself and discovering more about the building and its development, we've also been looking into some of the stories of members past and also famous visitors to the club. So we have a blog where we've been publishing these stories, but the most recent that we've looked at are the founders' stories. We're 150 years old this year, so it's quite an unusual circumstances in which to be celebrating our anniversary. We'd planned or hoped to do more events and get more people along to the Baths and show it off and talk about some of the stories. But in the meantime, what we've done is produce a walking tour, thanks to support from Doors Open Day. So there is a walking tour available to download from the Guide to Go app. The links are on our website and also be, I'm sure, available from Doors Open Day website. And that follows some of the stories of our founders from 150 years ago. And you can walk around the local area, visit their houses or see their houses, and hear a little bit of their stories. So Will and myself were both involved in some of the research for that. And I think it shows a really rich picture of some of the middle class, really, of Glasgow at the time, 150 years ago, the professions that they were involved in, the industries that they worked in, and the connections and networks between them. We found that many of the members, maybe they were married to one another. Some of the, somebody's sister would be married to one of the founding members, or they maybe were involved in a business together. And obviously they were all they were all members of the club here. One of the interesting things is that a lot of them, we were surprised to find out, were involved in textile production, cotton, and dyeing, the Turkey red dyeing industry, which was very big in Glasgow and in the Vale of Leven at the time. Others were lawyers. There were a few people who were chartered accountants. This was an exciting new profession at the time. It was only just becoming established, and these people were at the forefront of that profession. And in fact, there's a company still in Glasgow, Sloan's, in Glasgow today, still practice as accountants, and they're connected with some of our founders. So it was fascinating to kind of delve into all of this. But we've also got lots and lots of other stories from the past. We're in the room at the moment where the War Memorial is situated. And so we've looked at some of the names on the War Memorial and found out some of their stories, particularly with the First World War centenary a few years back. We've discovered some of the stories there, some of the tragic stories. From the Second World War, recently found the story of Archie McKellar, who has a room actually in Kelvin Grove Museum, if you have a chance to go in there. And it was one of the kind of the flying aces of the Second World War. So lots of this, as I say, is on our blog, and we're also obviously happy to kind of answer questions, or if you were a member in the past, or someone was a member, do get in touch with us, because we're really keen to kind of like hear people's memories and stories, from not just 150 years ago, but from the more recent past as well. So I don't know if there's any questions, John, that we need to consider. Shout them out to us.
Marion's asking about the fountain.
Oh, the fountain, right? Okay, Will, that'll be one for you. Will's just checking exactly what Marion wants to know about the fountain. So before he gives you a big lecture. Right.
All right. Okay. Right. So Marion's asking about when the more modern tiles, kind of in the Turkish suite, come from. I think they've got a name like Byzantine or something. There's a quite a weird name, sort of Turkish name about them. We think they're from the 1960s. You can still get the pattern, with a slightly updated version of the pattern. So we do have a couple of them down in the basement that have the mark on them, but they do still exist. I'm sure it's something like Byzantine, something like that. And they come in kind of various phases. So the ones around the Nureyev bench, that would have been about the 1960s. And I think there's a slightly more updated version of that up at the senior bass, which is about the 80s. And you can kind of see this slight change in the decoration on the tiles, but the same pattern.
There was a question about the water supply to the fountain.
Is it specific? Does the fountain...
How the water supply can work?
Why can't it work? Can it work? I believe it does work. The only trouble being that directly below the central fountain is the electrics of the club. So we could turn it on, but it could spring a leak. And if it springs a leak, it will probably take down all the electrics in the building, including the pumps. So it's a bit of a risk. It would be lovely to get it completely restored. Also, whether it originally was a drinking fountain, I suppose, is a question in itself. It might have just been a reflecting pool. If they really were making their own little Alhambra in Woodlands, it was probably much more a reflecting pool to reflect the stars up. I think the drinking fountain, kind of chrome drinking fountain that's down there at the moment, looks as if it maybe came in the 1920s. So they probably were thirsty by then, they needed somewhere to drink. But the actual hexagonal fountain may have just been a couple of inches of water. And I always imagine when the light comes in the early morning through the stars and hits the fountain, it would bounce that straight back up onto the dome, and the dome would kind of be mesmerising when you were lying there as it kind of swirls round silently. Would hope.
Yes, that's something true. The Arlington has we've got a number of, they're not so much rules as just kind of customs, but one of them is that you don't talk in the Turkish, partly to just keep it very, very quiet and peaceful and relaxed. But also apparently the sound bounces right off the roof, and so anything you whisper in one corner can be heard very clearly in the other. So there's other sort of customs around the Arlington. One is in the lanes, in the pool, or the pond, as we call it. That's the old-fashioned name for the swimming pool. Once you're in the lane, that's yours. You don't have to share it. So you get the lane to yourself for as long as you need it. One of the other things, actually, one of the benefits of membership is that you get to leave your costume here, and you get a towel when you come in, and you can pick up your costume, which will have been dried, laundered and dried for you, and it's on a peg. So everybody gets a number. My number, I'm going to tell you, it's 419. But someone else would have had that. We reuse the numbers. So another woman will have had my number before me, and then another woman before her, and so on, way back. And in fact, ladies were members of the Arlington Baths, even back in a very early period. They were encouraged to join from at least, I think, 1871, possibly earlier. They didn't have exactly the same hours as the men, but they were able to join for a reduced rate. And one of the key things was actually that they got swimming lessons as part of their membership as well, because women wouldn't necessarily have had much of a chance to learn to swim. Little boys would have been able to just jump in the local river or canal and figure it out. But women didn't get that, or girls didn't get that chance. So throughout the years, women have also been members, and gradually, obviously, we've got more and more equal hours with the men. Till now it's equal time. And there's mixed times as well, of course. But these are some of the kind of like the quirks of of being a member of such a historic kind of club. Maybe Andrew, you can tell us a wee bit more about how the club actually sort of runs today. How you join if you're interested in becoming a member.
We have a number of membership categories, ranging from adults to couple, family, which is normally 2 adults and 2 children, but can be a bit flexible on the children. Out of town membership for those who may live beyond a 30-mile radius of Glasgow, and student members. We currently have a membership promotion on all full adult memberships, where we're offering 12 months membership for the price of 10. And that works out at £520 a year, or £44 a month by direct debit.
Yeah, so obviously I've been a member for about 10 years, and it's great. And the benefit of not having to like lug your soppy costume around is brilliant. You just drop it into a basket, and then it's ready for you next time you come around. And there's also space to keep like a wee bag of bits and bobs, shampoo, mascara, that kind of stuff, if you need something as well. So it's great. The staff are very helpful. There's always people here, and the building is open from, what's the time?
7 a.m. Monday to Friday until 10 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday from 8:30 to 9:30 in the evening.
So so plenty of time to come and swim. Obviously, the situation that we've had at the moment with with COVID-19 has been challenging for the Baths. We were shut for a while, and that was very sad. Delighted to be back open. But it also allowed us to, we did some more research at that point, and did a little bit of work to find out how the Baths had coped in previous times with sort of similar situations. So we had to look at the Second World War. That was a challenging time for the Baths. Obviously, people went away to join the forces, so membership declined. They kept memberships open for people who are in the forces. So whilst there wasn't the income coming in, and of course costs were rising. Things like fuel costs were rising. Cost of fuel and water were rising. Got to quite a difficult situation, but eventually we were fortunate in one of our devoted members instituted a fundraising drive, and he promised to give at first £500 and then £1,000 and then eventually £1,500 if it was matched by fundraising within the club. And thankfully, we were able to find the evidence that, well, we're still here, but we found the evidence that the money was raised and we were able to carry on. So that was just one of the kind of crises that the club has faced over the years, its 150-year history. The other that we looked at that time was polio epidemic. I don't know if Will, if you looked at that story, didn't you? Do you want to tell us a wee bit more about what you found out?
Well, after the Second World War, there was quite a large outbreak of polio across the world, and I think a lot of it was transmitted by troops returning home from various bits of the world. So in 1947, there was a big outbreak in the UK. I think in total, 8,000 people died, which compared to where we are at the moment, maybe doesn't sound that big, but at the time it was deemed to be a very important outbreak. Scotland wasn't too badly hit compared to the rest of the country. What did happen was it wasn't even in the big cities where you would think that polio would be transmitted very readily, and obviously because people were crammed closer together, it was actually some of the rural areas that were a bit more badly affected. How we found out about it was the club has its archives in the Mitchell Library, and we'd already started digitising some of those records. And some of the minute books of the 150 year of the club noted that attendance had been down, especially for children, in 1947. And we also found out what the original name of polio was. So it was called infantile paralysis, because if you are affected by polio at a young age, it can have long-term effects, obviously, on your health. So at the time, it appears to be that Glaswegians were being very sensible and doing their own 1947 version of social distancing and just being careful about where they went at the time. So what happened then, as we said, like Glasgow wasn't that badly affected compared to some of the more rural areas in Scotland. But in the United States, it actually went, in some cities, it went very, very badly for them. And it kind of spurred on the development of vaccines for polio, so the epidemic kind of circles on for a few years. And it's about the kind of early to mid 50s, we developed the polio vaccine, and suddenly it becomes a non-issue again. But it was quite a kind of weird piece in history. You could see where we were almost exactly where we were back in March, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stories have been like fascinating. We looked into a particular chap who's on the War Memorial from the First World War, and we started with his name, Ernest Perry. So looked into his kind of war service. He was a student actually at Glasgow University for a while, though he didn't graduate. I think they quite often didn't in those days. They would just like study. He was an engineer at the Sentinel Works in Polmadie in Glasgow. And then when the war started, he joined up. And he was killed in 1915. He died at the Battle of Lewes in 1915. So that was one story, and it was interesting, the things we discovered about his life here in Glasgow. But we also, from looking at those kind of records in the Mitchell that Will was talking about, you can see all the connections between all the members. The members' names are all there, stretching not quite all the way back to 80 or almost to 1870, but with some gaps here and there. But there's thousands and thousands of names there, including perhaps the names of some of your ancestors. But we could see from those books that not only was Ernest Perry a member, but his mother and father were members too. And he had been a member since he was a little boy. So his mother was called May Perry, and his father was called Robert Perry. Robert Perry was a physician in Glasgow, quite well known, eminent physician, and actually lived around the corner in, is it West Princess Street? Yes, what's now West Princess Street. At that time, Queen's Crescent, I think. So the family had lived there, so obviously very close to the baths. And they were all members, including some of the other children. There was another sister called Hilda, And Robert Perry was actually, as part of his job as a surgeon, he actually attended on the, well, Will, you know more about this than I do. You can fill in the details of the murder story. Yes.
So, as probably a lot of people know, in Glasgow, there was this murder of Marion Gilchrist on West Princes Street in the early 1900s. And it was famous at the time because it got known as the Oscar Slater murder, the Oscar Slater case. And Oscar Slater was, I think, Hungarian. Yeah, I think he was Hungarian, but was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. So he got classed as being German in the city. He wasn't really felt as being maybe such a reputable person. There's sort of lots of things, lots of aspiration cast about his character and how he made his money. But he basically got framed for the Marion Gilchrist murder, who was a wealthy spinster who lived in West Princes Street. The reason it became such a big case was Oscar Slater went into correspondence with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who took a great interest in the case and actually pled his case all the way through. But Oscar Slater himself was locked up in Peterhead Prison for about 25 years or something, for something that, going by modern policing standards, he definitely did not do. Some people might also remember that the Carnarvon Bar along in Carnarvon Street, just across from the Baths itself, went through a period of being called the Oscar Slater, kind of in commemoration of that. So Arthur Conan Doyle took up his case, argued it in Parliament. Obviously, he was a very influential person at the time as the author of Sherlock Holmes. And he kind of applied a lot of the Sherlock Holmes analytical techniques to prove how this could not have been Oscar Slater who committed this murder, this horrific murder of Marion Gilchrist. Then, as well as getting Oscar Slater released eventually and pardoned for it, it actually led to the development of the appeal court in Scotland, and I guess in British law at that time. So that's a kind of murder story, and Dr. Perry was the person who called Marion Gilchrist's death. She was the first person on the scene and saw how she had died. But it's quite a horrific story, to be honest.
I think he also he wrote about conditions in Glasgow as well. I think about treatment of disease, things like that. So obviously was a kind of like a prominent person within Glasgow. His wife, May Perry, we don't know very much about her, and that's one of the problems with doing research like this. Is it's quite hard to find out about some of the women's lives. But she was certainly a member for a long time, and the first honorary secretary of the ladies section of the Arlington Baths was actually a man, but he had been instrumental in sort of setting up the ladies section, and so was given this honor of being the honorary secretary. But once he stopped in 1890, so 20 years after we've been founded, it was May Perry became the first woman to become the honorary secretary of the ladies section, and she remained in that post for a long time. So both of her daughters, as well as Ernest Perry, her son, being a member, both her daughters were members, Ethel and Hilda. Ethel also turned out to have a really interesting story once we started looking at her life. So she lived in Glasgow. She didn't marry, but when the First World War broke out, she volunteered. She joined the Scottish Women's Hospital and volunteered to serve abroad. So she wasn't a nurse, but she was involved in sort of other activities to support the hospitals, orderlies, being a cook, that kind of thing, I think. So she went to Serbia, where Dr. Elsie Ingalls was based. So the Scottish Women's Hospitals, you probably know the story, but very fascinating story of how female doctors in Scotland were told not to get involved in the war efforts, that they weren't needed, but yet they went ahead anyway and set up their own organisation, funded it, raised the funds for their organisation, went abroad, set up hospitals and treated injured, wounded soldiers and civilians. Just basically, provided services wherever they were needed. So Ethel was involved in this. She also joined other voluntary organisations later on in the First World War. So she served throughout the whole of the First World War in these positions. Then she came back to Glasgow, carried on swimming at the Arlington Baths. And her sister Hilda had got married and moved to Ireland, but her husband died. And so she'd returned to Glasgow with her daughter, who was also called Hilda. And then what was really sweet was when we were doing this kind of research and looking at the archives in the Mitchell Library, in the Glasgow City Archives, you can actually see the membership form where Ethel signs the membership form for her niece, Hilda. So Hilda's about 9 years old, and Ethel signs her form to allow her to also join the Baths. So you can see this kind of lineage of families with mothers, fathers, children, grandchildren, all becoming members of the Baths. And then Ethel's story doesn't quite finish there, because she actually, both Ethel and Hilda then went on to live together. They moved down south to England and shared a house. But in the Second World War, they also volunteered in the Second World War as well. They were air raid wardens then as well. So it's quite an incredible kind of life that she had. And it was just, as I say, we started with the one name on the war memorial, Ernest Perry. And ended up with this incredible story of a Glasgow family. And there's probably more still to learn, but one of the difficulties, of course, with historical research when you're a volunteer group is just finding the time to be able to spend your, to delve into all of these kind of stories. But we're fortunate as a group that people are very enthusiastic. We're also always finding new things, sometimes just around the club. So in the mysterious basement, which you got a glimpse of in the video there, is a cupboard full of kind of boxes of files and envelopes, which we've started having a look at, but we need to explore further. Andrew, he's always adding to this this collection of items that we find around the club. But one of the kind of the recent quite exciting stories that we found there was to confirm a rumour that was sort of known around the club, and it was sort of believed that at some point in the 1970s that the Russian ballet dancer Rudolf Nureyev had visited the Arlington Baths. And there was a story about it, a fictional story written by one of our members who wrote fiction, a woman called Nancy MacLeod. But we weren't quite sure if this was actually based on fact or not, until eventually in this these boxes in the basement, when we were actually going through some of the stuff and trying to sort it all out, we discovered a newsletter from 1975 which described the visit of Rudolf Nureyev to the Baths. And I think it's mentioned in the wee film that there's a massage bench which is still downstairs in the club. Which is the bench on which Rudolf Nureyev had a massage. So the full story is available on the blog. But we also, once having discovered this this newsletter and having published the story, then of course, some people came forward to say, "Oh yes, I remember that." So it was really nice to then also get members' recollections of that event. And it's always nice to kind of discover these sort of stories that are not only just about Glasgow, but kind of connect the club to the wider world as well. Are there any more questions, John? Sorry, I'm rabbiting on and too enthusiastic.
We've got one which maybe should be directed to Andrew. Once the current pandemic crisis is over, will the yoga, tai chi and swimming lessons resume again?
Yeah, we hope to review that in the next couple of weeks with a view to starting the activity programme in the likes of yoga, tai chi and Pilates in this room from November. The use of the swimming pool for swimming lessons might take a little bit longer, but certainly we're looking to get the activity programme up and running again as soon as we can.
There's another question. During the Second World War, did the Baths offer special memberships to women and men of the armed forces?
Oh, it's a good question. Certainly in the First World War, there was a reduced rate for nurses, and we have evidence that some nurses joined, though I think they were nurses actually in a kind of like a care home rather than nursing like wounded soldiers as such. They were, it was a sort of care home for elderly people up the road, but they did, they definitely, there was a wee cluster of women joining. At that point, I do know, Will, I can't remember if I noticed that particularly during the Second World War. There were things like there was an air raid shelter was set up in the street, and they asked to be able to use the building at some point, and that was granted.
An emergency water supply.
Oh yes, yeah,
We're
obviously.
certain we were.
We have a lot of water, so.
We have a lot of water. So in the event of a bomb falling and a fire starting, the outside of ourselves and the Western Bass was marked with an emergency water supply symbol. So the fire brigade would know exactly how to get to the pool as fast as possible. So I think that was one way they helped out.
Yeah, I don't think the pool or the building suffered any kind of damage during the war. There's one, I think, came across one mention of maybe like some broken window, but it wasn't in fact very clear whether it had been kind of actually due to the war or some other kind of accident. Certainly in the First World War, what they did was kept the places open for the members who had gone to the war, which was considerable. I mean, we were talking out of a membership of about 600 men, about 300 were in the services. So they kept those memberships open but didn't charge them. So that was a kind of quite a financial hit. At the time, they tried they got more women members at the time to try and make up for some of that shortfall. But I have to say, I'm not sure if that happened in the Second World War as well. A wee bit more research required there. After the Second World War, there were some changes in the baths as well, obviously in the physical kind of construction of the baths, which maybe Will can update us about in a minute, but also things like the ladies section. You can see some examples on the blog of the kind of costumes that the ladies used to wear, and they're pretty bulky and kind of like you imagine trying to swim in them. They're made of cotton. They were kind of, had like sort of short sleeves and like long bloomers. After the war, some of the women in the ladies section, including Ethel Perry, pushed to be able to adopt more modern costumes called stockinette costumes. So more of those kind of things that you would imagine from the 1920s, those more kind of skin tight, sort of like costumes with little shorts. And it was rejected at first, that proposal was rejected, but they kind of kept pushing for it and eventually managed to get that pushed through. So you can sort of see how the BAS has changed, or the membership has changed as a result of the war and of the society kind of changing. You can tell us a wee bit, Will, about how the terrazzo and the,
Yeah, well, the terrazzo was after the First World War. Mm-hmm. So it was, the terrazzo is the kind of crushed up, it's a sort of waste product of cutting of marble. So there's these little pebbles of marble that are left after you cut, say, countertops or something like that. And they got all these pebbles together, and then they kind of bind them together with a resin. And it had been used previously, actually, historically, but we were one of the earliest uses of terrazzo in Scotland for this purpose, to go around the pool. And it kind of covered up what we think was maybe even wood before that. We're not quite sure. So that was about 1920. The pool also then, just before the war, 1930s, it brings in the sand filtration, which makes us wonder about what they did before then. So the water's coming down from Loch Katrine. The pool's actually built in 1870, about 10 years after the Loch Katrine project. So we've got this plentiful clean water supply. From the historical record, it looks like the pool was unheated and unfiltered, perhaps for the first basically 60 years, which is a bit worrying.
And you can be assured that it's now heated and filtered.
So we don't quite know what we did. There seemed to be spaces in the working week of the pool where they would drain the pool for an afternoon and refill. So we think they had like 2 days, and then a day when half the pool was empty, and then refilled, and then it was another 2 days. So it kind of just replenished the pool every couple of days to keep it clean. So obviously that took out quite a lot of time that the pool could be used. And obviously the women were urgent to get more time in the pool, as it proves from their minutes. And they come up with this idea of a sand filtration system, which you saw in the video, the big red tank below the office, actually. So that gets instituted, I think, about 1930, 32. And the pool's also at the same time looking to expand a wee bit, and it pushes into the cottages just behind the pool. Then work seems to kind of get delayed a bit, probably because of the war. It's not quite certain from the minutes what exactly happens there. But the lower showers, which I think we're hoping to maybe look at soon as well for refurbishment, they were first instituted down that bit of the building. And they were constructed by David Alexander Hislop, who's another Glaswegian architect. His practice draw up the plans, which are in Glasgow University's special collection. And that's where we've got our kind of power showers, our surround showers from the 1930s. That Hislop's practice then goes on to do some other changes to the pool. So just after the war, there was always problems with the boiler, like all the way through our history, there's been problems with the boiler. And they've changed the boiler position about 4 times. And that last big change before it went to gas was the construction of a new coal boiler. And that was overseen by David Alexander Hislop's and the Scottish Boiler Company. We've got all their plans of the bottom basement. So that was about the last big thing I think they did, really. And then it was the repairs to the roof in the late 1980s, early 90s, wasn't it? The Historic Scotland.
Obviously, it does take quite a bit to kind of keep the building running, because it is a historic building, and also it's got a lot of water in, so there's a lot of dampness around. We have a unique, or it's quite a special sort of ventilation system in the building, which again was introduced, well, when it was first built, which allows air to circulate. It's called a Plenum System. Again, one day when you can come back in, you can see it. But I think, throughout sort of its history, the BAS has been quite early adopters of technology and tried, kind of just kept up to date. We got electricity pretty early on, 1902, I think. Yep. Obviously, things like adopting the terrazzo, getting that installed. We had a telephone pretty early on. The sand filtration system, which, as Will says, is still going today. Which actually is it's quite an environmentally friendly system. It allows us to not use as many chemicals, I believe. Is that correct, Andrew? Yeah. So because of the way it cleans the water. But with care, these kind of things last, and they keep on going. And the building is in pretty good nick for where we are at the moment. But we do obviously rely on, the members' income, where it's a not-for-profit organisation. So all of the membership fees just go straight back into running the building, paying the staff, keeping the repairs up, and making improvements. But it's a really beautiful and unique space. So, if you do want to come along and have a look, when that's feasible, then, please do. I think we're almost approaching the end of our time. I don't know if there's any other kind of burning questions that we've managed to answer everything so far. So I just really need to sort of thank the panel, thank Will for his contributions, and Andrew. And as I say, any queries about membership, please, Andrew will be happy to answer those. Do search for the website or look up the website, and there's an email address there or phone number. To get in touch. Also, I need to thank Colin, who's in the video, for presenting the video for us, which is brilliant. And also I think there were some extras who appear in there, Kirsty, Ian and Martin. So thank you very much for allowing filming to take place. Thank thanking Stephen Sheriff as well at Glasgow Doors Open Day Festival for all your support in both this event, we had an event earlier in the week, and also, as I mentioned, we've got the walking tour, which is available to download and to go around the local area. So it's been brilliant having that kind of support from Doors Open Day Festival over the years, but also particularly this year, which have been quite difficult kind of circumstances. So thank you very much indeed for tuning in and for your comments and your questions. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, we may have some more of these events, so please do click that button. And let us know, add some comments there or get in touch and let us know if you'd like to see more of these kind of like live stream events. We could do things more history stuff. We could maybe do some music. We've had that. You'll see a video of music in the pool that happened during the summer. Maybe traditionally we've had book readings at the club as well in the last few years for Book Week Scotland in November, so we could maybe do something like that, and other talks as well. So please do let us know if that would be of interest. Finally, I just have to say a big thank you to John as well, who's a member of the history group, who has been absolutely instrumental in getting all of this running, and it would not have happened without him. So thank you very much indeed, John. You won't see him because he's behind the camera, but he's been absolutely crucial to this. So thanks. Oh, he's coming in front of the camera, so to give us a wave. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you back in through our doors at some point in the near future. Thank you. Bye-bye.